Good afternoon to you all. I welcome you to this live session, the first live session of this 8-week course on modern Indian drama. And let me first begin by giving you a brief overview of what we have covered so far. So we began with week 1, which was an introduction to modern Indian drama, beginning with an overview of Sanskrit and national theatre, of how classical models of Sanskrit theatre became the template on which modern Indian theatre came to be designed. But there was also a confluence of older classical models of Sanskrit theatre with colonial forms of theatre and dramaturgy, which emphasized, focused on introducing the proscenium arch and along with it, lighting and change in scenery and all those things. So we noticed how, one of the early phases of colonial theatre was Parsi theatre, which drew from various traditions of folk and performative theatre, and also in some sense, incorporated many early, actors, many of whom were men, who cross-dressed impersonated women and ended up playing the roles of pious and chaste Hindu wives, largely women, men who played women who suffered the injustices of patriarchy. Then we also discussed the impact that a lot of Indian folk traditions had, and how the Indian folk traditions of performance was seen by many of the early and post-independence playwrights as a crucial component of the heritage of Indian theatre. And so many playwrights that we discussed, especially Girish Karnad, incorporated many of these folk elements into his own theatre to produce what he thought would be a post-colonial tradition of Indian theatre. But of course, it was not a very easy negotiation, because many of these playwrights had to constantly negotiate the difficulties of having to inherit two different forms of theatre. One which was colonial, and part of which was Parsi, and also certain Indian forms of performance traditions, which were not performed in an enclosed space, which were not performed in proscenium arches, which relied more on natural light and were performed out in the open, and also did not conform to any of the normative formal rules of colonial theatre. Then in week 2, we looked at some of Vijay Tendulkar's crucial plays, beginning with Silence, the Court's in Session, and where we also observed how the court becomes one of those crucial sites of institutional power, of power and patriarchy, where a woman is trapped and symbolically and literally trapped in the court, and ends up in some sense becoming a victim of patriarchy, but is not able to resist the accusations and charges against her of infanticide. And the play itself, in some sense, is also a mocking satire of the pieties of motherhood. So we saw that in the character of Miss Binari. In A Friend Story, again, you see another important critique of certain sexual norms through the main character who plays a lesbian woman, and how, in some sense, this play was a crucial response to this whole idea of heterosexism and patriarchy, but at the same time also ends up portraying a character who is rather, and in fact, I think the play also goes beyond a commentary on heterosexism and heterosexist patriarchy, but also looks at the nature of love itself. It's a commentary on the nature of love, and how love, in some sense, can become a form of possession and authority. And of course, the character meets her end towards the end of the play. In Kashiram Kotwal, again, we noticed how through the main character Kashiram, it exposes the hollowness and corruption of political power and ambition, through this Brahmin who is not from Kannauj, who is not accepted as a pure Puneri Brahmin, and ends up through a very interesting form, because the play in some sense is one of those plays by Tendulkar which consciously draws from folk traditions, folk performances, and uses dance and music sequences to actually make a satirical comment on the hollowness of political power and the corruption of religion as an institution. And so, of course, by the end of the play, Kashi and Korpal actually ends up becoming a lot more corrupt and violent than those who perpetrated the violence against him. Then in week 3, we went to a continuation of Tendulkar's plays, beginning with Kanyadan, which was the last play we discussed, again exposing the power of casteism, caste as an institution, through a marriage between the daughter of a leftist Gandhian intellectual and Dalit journalist, Dalit protagonist, and how in some sense for the father and the daughter of the play, the marriage is in some sense a Gandhian experiment of sorts of tolerance, but in some sense the marriage in some sense goes alright towards the end of the play, but then Jyoti, the protagonist, actually ends up insisting on actually staying married to her husband, and that she even embraces his untouchable status and also claims to be, in some sense, reborn as a Dalit. And of course, this is also partly done to question and challenge her father's liberal Gandhian notions of coexistence and universality. Then we went on to a discussion of some of Girish Karnad's plays, beginning with Haivadana and Tughlaq, and then going on to the Dreams of Tipu Sultan, The Fire and the Rain. Again, Girish Karnad in some sense is very important because he also draws from a lot of folk and Puranic myths and legends to, in some sense, and recast them in a very modern idiom to actually critique, again, modern institutional sites of power. And so we saw that in Haivadana in terms of how he complicates patriarchy and the notion of female desire through a woman's desire for her husband as well as his best friend through an exchange of transposition of their heads. Then we also noticed later on in the other plays, especially in The Fire and the Rain, of broken images. Again, various themes are being engaged with here, dealt with. So, for example, in the Dreams of Tipu Sultan, again, you have the play really is about what counts as official history and what, in some sense, is the fact that you can have conflicting notions of history about a very controversial historical figure, Tipu Sultan, who cannot be, along at least amidst scholars, could not be easily dismissed as a Muslim despot, as a Hindu-hating Muslim monarch, but at the same time was also seen as someone who was known for his generous grants to temples and monks. And in fact, the play in some sense is also an interesting take on the complex conjunction and interweavings of memory and history. And we saw that through his court historian as well as the colonial missionary scholars, Mackenzie, as well as the British colonial rulers of the time, and how in some sense they managed to, in some sense, construct a history of Tipu Sultan that they thought would suit their colonial purposes. And again, in The Fire and the Rain, broken images, again, you have a very rather trenchant satire of, for example, in broken images, you have the very conflicted kind of fraught relationship between English and the non-English Indian languages through the literary device of a woman who, who in some sense also plagiarizes her sister's novel and then ends up writing a work in her own name. And you see how the mirror images of the sister in some sense function to, in some sense, deflate the female protagonist's ego, and also in some sense make a statement on the insecurity that exists between non-English languages in terms of the larger world of communication and commerce. And in My Shell Culture's plays, again, we actually went through some of his most important plays, including Garbo, Desire on the Rocks, The Old Stone Mansion, and so on, which were again, in some sense, were interested in, exposing or reflecting on the relationship between aesthetics, art, and aesthetics, and how, in some sense, all these plays, in some sense, are interested in, also in some sense, challenging patriarchy, and but at the same time, they also have female characters who are not always able to challenge or resist patriarchy in their own way. And it's also, in some sense, reflective of El Concho's own interest in the, role that art and especially literature has to play in trying to recreate life and to be able to produce new life. So you have, of course, the role, the figure of the artist, and you also have the figure of for example, the woman who's pregnant in one of the Desire on the Rocks. And you also have, for example, the Old Stone Mansion, which is about one of his more historical plays, which is about the changing fortunes of a generation of Brahmin landowners with the emergence of Bombay as a major urban site of employment, and the introduction of land reforms in rural Maharashtra. And then again, Sonata again is about the very fraught intimacies between three women, two of whom live together in the same flat in Bombay, and it's also about their own intimacies, their own jealousies, their own hierarchies, and the fact that these women, in some sense, are also making, in some sense, collaborate to produce a very interesting commentary on the nature of patriarchy and female desire. Then we moved on to Mahesh Dattani's plays, and how his plays, in some sense, were again exposed the patriarchal family and the state, and the other fraught intersections of gender, sexuality, and communalism in his plays Final Solutions and Bravely Fought the Queen. We then continued with his last play, Dance Like a Man, where you again have, it problematizes the connection, the association of dancing with femininity and women through the portrayal of a male dancer, and the intergenerational differences between the parents and the daughter, who ends up marrying a man who has to be educated and whose opinions about dance and eroticism have to be transformed and reformed in the play. And so the daughter, of course, ends up becoming a successful dancer, and she becomes a mother. But in some sense, she's also learning from the mistakes that her parents made. The fact that the mother is portrayed as a very well-known, popular dancer, but also a very principled and ethical woman who ends up having to compromise her principles because to actually make sure that her daughter becomes a famous dancer. And the father, of course, is a rather kind of insecure man, also a dancer in his own right, but ends up having to compete with his wife for the stage, and ends up feeling rather insecure. And you also noticed in some of the other plays that we discussed by Dattani that there was also a very interesting comment being made on communal relationships between Hindus and Muslims, and what in some sense becomes a problem in the second play that we discussed, where Final Solutions, where there is this rather ironic portrayal of a father and daughter who are very liberal Hindus, but whose liberalism is again being challenged by through an encounter with two Muslims, one of whom is the daughter's friend's brother, and the other one is supposed to be her fiance. And so in some sense it's also talking about the ironies and the paradoxes of liberalism, religious tolerance, and the fact that you have characters in the play who, it's also mirror and reflect each other. So you have Aruna's Hindu orthodoxy, which is mirrored, which is reflected also in Javed's kind of virulent hatred for Hindus, and the fact that he's also responsible for planting a bomb. Right? And so you have also the hypocrisy, the hollowness of electoral politics and political parties. And in the last section, we looked at Bharat Sarkar's plays about his plays in some sense were a little different from the other plays that we have discussed so far, which is that in some sense they are also rather very explicit ethical moral statements on the corruption of modern life and the corruption that exists in modern institutions and sites of power. And you saw it in Stale News and Bhoma and his other play Procession, which in some sense are all about the exposing the injustices that are being perpetrated against the marginalized sections of society, including the poor, those who are refugees. You see these sections of the population becoming the protagonists, and he does this also through certain very dramatic elements like the procession itself in the play Procession. Where it's a procession that's leading to some place, some destination. We're not sure what the destination is, but the play does end on a note of hope. But nonetheless, the play in some sense is also about how the journey of these refugees, these fugitives, these marginalized people, in some sense, is also a very fragile and fraught journey where they have to face a lot of difficulties and death, right? And so a lot of his plays, in some sense, are rather explicit, if you like, even propagandist kind of plays which expose the injustices of, the upper caste elite, the class elite, the landed class, political parties, and so on. So that's a brief overview of what we have covered over 8 weeks. So now I welcome any questions or clarifications that you can have. Yeah, sorry, let me just repeat my answer. I believe it was muted. So this is to answer your question, whether I could touch upon drama in other regional languages. Now, I'm not very familiar with many other regional languages and their major playwrights. I've heard of many, but I haven't read them, so it wouldn't be right for me to comment on them. But I can tell you something about for example, the Tamil kind of the scene of Tamil drama, because I'm more familiar with that language and literature. So one of them, of course, has been widely translated, has also won many awards, is Indira Parthasarathy, who was also very well known for one of his plays, which was Aurangzeb, which had to do with his portrayal of Aurangzeb and the character of Aurangzeb as someone who was incapable of, he wasn't a prudent man. He didn't know how to spend money. And so I think a lot of the downfall of the Mughal Empire has to do in the play with Aurangzeb's inability to actually, his poor fiscal policies. The fact that he didn't have good financial policy, he didn't know how to actually spend the money of the wealth of the kingdom. Then there are many other playwrights that are very important. I mean, you could look at some of the other playwrights from the Northeast. many important playwrights who have written in English, who have also been performed in English, that you could actually look at, and they've also been translated. One, of course, being Ratan Tian, another important playwright who has been translated and performed, and he also has a distinct style of his own, which also draws from Manipuri martial arts. So you have him, and then you have many other playwrights who haven't been translated. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that you probably can't read Bangla, so there must be many playwrights in Bengali who have not been translated and have not been covered in this course. So I'm sure you could actually do a very interesting comparative study of these different playwrights. And then, of course, there are very important playwrights in Hindi also that you could look at. If you read Hindi, then that could be very interesting. So, it's perfectly possible to look at different playwrights from different regions and literatures and do a very interesting comparative study of them. Okay. So yeah, since there are no more queries, I will close the session now. I'll probably meet you again in the next live session. Thank you.